On your Thursday draft recap episode of Locked On Raptors, the second round is in the books. The Raptors did a whole lot of stuff, and they're back to their old ways, baby. We'll break it all down coming up on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is a little late in the day on a Thursday, June the 27th. And I'm your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us over in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, which was absolutely popping off today. Nobody was working, nobody at all in the Locked On Raptors Discord. As soon as actually, it was way before the draft started at 4 o'clock that people were going nuts in there. Very clearly, lots of procrastination, lots of stolen company time, and I rate it. It was awesome. Come join us in the Discord if you haven't yet. Plenty to come, of course, as the off-season trudges along. And again, it's free to join. Link in the description of the podcast. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciate it when you support the show, however it is you choose to support the show. And of course, you can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, and you'll get a heads up every single time the show is about to premiere or go live. A live show could happen anytime over the next few days. It's crazy times. The Raptors roster makes very little sense right now. So hit that button and you'll be in the know when the show is about to premiere or go live. All right, let's get to it. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are going to dive in today headlong into a recap of the NBA draft. We'll talk a lot about the second round because holy crap, the Raptors did a lot of stuff in the second round. But we also cannot forget about the first round pick, Jacoby Walter, the best player the Raptors acquired over the last 2 days, probably, or at least the highest upside, unless you're an Ulrich Chomche person, which we'll get to that too. But yeah, we'll get into Jacoby Walter at the end of the show. I've got Cam Stewart of Locked On Baylor, recorded a chat with him earlier in the day talking about Jacoby Walter. I thought it was really informative from someone who knows ball really well and watched Jacoby Walter all season at Baylor. You have that to look forward to in the final segment of the show. But buckle up. We have a whole bunch of stuff to sort through from the day that was for the Toronto Raptors. We're going to get into the trade of the century, the absolute fleecing. Can you believe it? The Raptors turned Jaden McDaniels into a bunch of stuff from the big Sacramento Kings. We will get into that trade, the sort of ramifications, where it leaves the roster as well. But let's start with the draft picks, shall we? The Toronto Raptors went into the day with just one draft pick, 31. And, there was all sorts of talk. Will they trade this pick? Will they package it with something? Maybe Bruce Brown is in there in some way, shape, or form. Who knows? Bruce Brown not traded yet. We'll get to that coming up later, too. But the Raptors make the pick at 31, and the pick was Jonathan Mogbo, the 6'6", 7'2" wingspan, combo forward, center, big man, future basketball player type out of San Francisco University. Of course, noted as a dear friend of Scottie Barnes, who was in attendance for Jonathan Mogbo's draft party. So maybe that wasn't necessarily a surprise pick. Maybe this was telegraphed all along. Who knows? But very cool to see Scottie Barnes' pal drafted. And Mogbo, someone we talked about, I think about a month ago on the show, as sort of like a bit of an upside play in this draft. I think Mogbo, he is like a return to Toronto Raptors ash drafting. I'll tell you that. Most of today was very much that. We'll get into Jamal, Shead, and Ulrich Chomche as well. But Mogbo, I think, an interesting pick for the Raptors at 31. Look, not a shooter, can't shoot, never shot, just didn't take any threes when he was at school. But all the other stuff he does, from the athleticism, he tested really well at the combine. He is just like, again, enormous with a 7'2" wingspan and 9-foot standing reach. He figures to be someone who can play above his height. And, what does that mean? Where is he going to slot into the future plans? I think the lack of shooting is a bit of a concern, and it's going to require the Raptors to really load up on shooting elsewhere to make it work. Scottie Barnes is going to have to shoot. RJ Barrett's threes are going to have to fall for Mogbo to have a real chance of making it in the NBA. I think the context of the team, just as much as his own ability, is really going to dictate just how successful he can be. But a worthwhile bet on upside. Yes, he's 22 years old. Maybe he's a little later in the development track, but he's also made huge strides in recent seasons. This past year at San Francisco in particular, after bumping around community colleges and Missouri State and then to San Francisco this past year. A worthwhile bet on a super duper athletic guy who at the very least is going to make Raptors 905 super fun. We'll get more into Jonathan Mogbo. There is a little short out on the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel right now from Andy Patton of Locked On College Basketball with a bit of a breakdown on Mogbo if you want to go check that out. But we will continue to break him down and get into his game as the summer progresses. Summer League coming up, obviously. We'll get some more tape on him and everything like that. Seems like he's going to get a guaranteed contract as well, which is important because the next guy we're going to talk about also reportedly got a guaranteed contract from the Raptors at number 45 as the Raptors acquired this pick from the Sacramento Kings in the deal they pulled off earlier in the day. Again, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of that with Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov and another second-round pick coming the Raptors' way. But Jamal Shead is the pick for the Raptors at 45, the 6-foot defensive player of the year in college this past season. Big 12 player of the year, joins Jacoby Walter as Big 12 freshman of the year among Big 12 stars that the Raptors took this time around. And small guy, but everything you hear about Jamal Shead is unbelievable leader. Kelvin Sampson, the coach at Houston, said he's like the best leader he's ever coached. Lots of sort of high praise for him along those lines. The defense with him is absurd for a guy his size. He's 6 feet with a 6'3" wingspan, but super fast, super nasty, just an absolute menace defensively, and figures to be maybe one of the best point of attack defenders in this class. He might walk in and be the Raptors' best wing defender at 6 feet tall at this rate. That's not a good thing, but it's fun and interesting, and I think speaks to how good Jamal Shead figures to be defensively, even at his diminutive size. The three-point shooting is the thing that is the hang-up here. He has all sorts of high praise as an excellent, excellent passer. Some referring to him as even the best passer in this draft, averaged 6 assists a game last year at Houston. He's won a ton, just like an absolute stud, winning with Houston over the last 4 seasons where they've been a really successful program. I believe made Final Fours, if I'm not mistaken. I always forget who makes the Final Four as soon as the Final Four happens. But that Houston team has gone deep. They've been high seeds. They've won a ton of games. And Jamal Shead has been a big, big part of that the last few seasons here. And so I think if you're trying to shore up your backup point guard spot, we talked about KJ Simpson and Tyler Kolek last night on the podcast as like backup guards you could just go and try to add to the mix. I think Jamal Shead stands a pretty decent chance of coming into camp. He's got the guaranteed deal per Kelly Iko of The Athletic, who reported that just after the deal was made. Kelly is based out of Houston and has a, obviously connection with the Houston Cougars and all of that. I believe he was the first to report that Shead was going to be the Raptors pick at 45. And, he'll have a chance, I think, to grow into being the backup point guard for this team going forward. It's a lot to ask of a guy to be a backup point guard in year one, obviously. I'm sure there will be some G League time for Shead, but the makeup is there. The defensive stats, the box score metrics, the advanced stats, everything. Really, really like this dude. And, even as the league trends bigger, there's always room for really nasty backup point guard types who can kind of make things happen and stay in the league just because they're a pain in the ass to deal with. It seems like that's what Jamal Shead's deal is going to be. And then the last pick the Raptors made, a surprise, the second to last pick in the draft, 57th overall. The Toronto Raptors, I guess, buy into the draft for the Memphis Grizzlies pick there, and they take Ulrich Chomche, the 18-year-old, 6'10", 7'4" wingspan big man out of Cameroon and the NBA Africa Academy. He is the Bruno Caboclo of this draft. If there are guys who are mystery men anymore in the NBA draft, by the way, go read Danny Chow's incredible piece on Bruno Caboclo over at The Ringer today. But when it comes to Ulrich Chomche, this is the absolute long-term upside play, right? He obviously has a lot of raw tools to him. He's got a bit of a shooting stroke. He's got the 7'4" wingspan and some shot blocking acumen, some nice touch and footwork, kind of delicate on his feet. Again, there's so little tape on him. It's hard to really draw tons of conclusions. He's going to be someone who's either stashed overseas or going to come and play in the G League, one would think, for a while. I would be stunned if he gets a guaranteed deal from the Raptors out of the gate. Sam Vecini said he's about 5 years away from being a guy. That's fine. He's the the fourth guy they took in this draft. It's all right to have some longer term irons in the fire, if you will. It may not mean anything down the line. Ulrich Chomche very well could not be an NBA player, but we know the Raptors like to do this. So this is their history of, hey, we like this guy. We believe in the tools. We believe in our development. Let's take him. Let's see what we can do with him. And look, man, Nick Nurse no longer around. The Darko Rajakovic regime seems to be prioritizing player development once again. I like their chances of getting the most out of whatever Ulrich Chomche is going to be down the line. It's just going to take some time, and maybe he makes 905 ball pretty interesting next season, the year after, whatever he decides to come over, whatever the Raptors deem that best. We'll see. He's played in the BAL over in Africa as well, so we'll see where he ends up playing next season. But he's in the system now, Ulrich Chomche. End of the day, the big takeaway here is the Toronto Raptors are back on their old BS, baby, taking super high toolsy, projectable guys who may or may not hit who they believe in dudes, and also really nasty guys who are nice leaders at the point guard position who stand no taller than 6 feet. That's the Raptors I know, baby. Glad to see you, Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, doing their old tricks after a few years out in the wilderness. You love to see it. With that, speaking of old tricks, fleecing basketball teams in trades. That's the thing they used to do all the time. Did they do that with the Sacramento Kings? Maybe, I guess, sort of, in terms of quantity of stuff coming back for Jalen McDaniels. Absolutely. We'll get into the ramifications of the Jalen McDaniels trade with the Sacramento Kings and all that's coming back the other way coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. You got to check out Game Time. It's the best place to buy tickets for the sports, concerts, theater events you want to go to all summer long. And hey, not just the summer, Raptors 905 basketball will be back before you know it. And if you want to go see Jonathan Mogbo, maybe Ulrich Chomche, Jamal Shead, you can go and buy your tickets for Paramount Fide Food Center in Mississauga, hosting Raptors 905 games, and you can do it with Game Time, the very best place to buy tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have all-in pricing, so you never get fees up at the front, at the end that surprise you, which is, oh, it's what I thought I was paying. What a beautiful thing. This is the way all ticketing apps should be. You get seat views, so you know exactly what you're buying before you buy. It's all there for you, including Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. There's simply no reason not to use Game Time to buy tickets for your next event. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDINNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDINNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, back at it here. Got to dig in now to the trade with the Sacramento Kings that kicked off the day. I didn't think it was like the biggest thing of the day, so that's why I led with the guys they picked off top. But certainly, it was a nice way to wake up from an afternoon nap around 3:30. When I did say in the Locked On Raptors Discord, I'm taking a nap. We're charging up for the second round. Here's hoping the Raptors make a hilariously positive trade in their favor while I'm napping. And they kind of did that. I just am a soothsayer, I guess. I don't know. The tail of the tape on this trade with the Sacramento Kings, the Toronto Raptors get Davion Mitchell, Sasha Vezenkov, the 45th overall pick in this draft, and the Portland Trailblazers 2025 second round pick for Jalen McDaniels. That Blazers second round pick, the Raptors simply got a taste this time around of picking first on the second day of the draft and wanted to go and short the team that is definitely finishing 15th in the West next season. They are sickos. They just can't get enough picking first in the second round, I guess. I don't know. Either way, that was the move. And look, sending Jalen McDaniels, who was really, 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 really bad for the Toronto Raptors last year, out for a bunch of guys who are not Jalen McDaniels, that's a win. To get 2 second-round picks, look, second-round picks, again, it's darts. It's a gigantic game of darts. That's all it is. And you're usually not going to hit on those second-round picks, but having a lot of them is good. They're currency for trades. They're sweeteners for trades. And with the new cap environment that's coming in with the second apron, all the insider types have been really reporting on this of late. The second round pick is going to become kind of an interesting thing for contenders and teams that are trying to build on the margins. If you're in the second apron, second round picks are basically your only way to add to your team. On top of that, there's a new second round player exception built into the CBA that is going to make those second round picks more valuable. Look, it's just a nice thing to have extra second rounders, especially one that could be high from the Portland Trailblazers, who are not going to be very good next season just because the Western Conference is an absolute bear and they are little cubs. It's going to take some time for them to figure things out. Okay. Either way, this trade is a win, no doubt. It's a good bit of asset management. It's a good way of using the Raptors' flexibility they have from clearing their decks and sort of having more open books. It's not the sexy, take a nice good player into your cap space type of move that maybe we all really hoped could have been the thing the Raptors pulled off this summer. But hey, this is a nice bit of asset management at the very least. They get Jamal Shead in the door and they get a look at Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov on top of that 2025 Blazers pick. Now, look, the players returning here are probably the thing I'm least excited about, honestly. I think Davion Mitchell, I'm seeing a lot of, young up-and-coming, prospect, guy who has lots of upside. No, it's been a rough go for Davion Mitchell for the last couple seasons in Sacramento after being a first-round pick. He was a lottery pick back 3 seasons ago. It's just he's fallen out of favor, fallen out of the rotation on the Kings because his offense is just not there. Defensively, absolutely. He's a wonderful point of attack defender. That's something the Raptors badly need. In second units, certainly you could do a little bit worse than having Davion Mitchell out there hounding opposing lead ball handlers. But the offense is a struggle. The three-point shooting, there was like a slight pulse last year that you kind of could feel, 36% on 2.2 attempts a game. Maybe you latch onto that as a bit of hope, but he's never been an especially good finisher. He doesn't bring a ton to the table offensively. Any notions that he's like the new backup point guard, I think are incorrect. I think that grossly sort of mischaracterizes what kind of player Davion Mitchell is. He's someone who's going to be a defensive pest on the second unit. You probably don't want the ball in his hands a ton. And if you can start to knock down some threes, hey, that becomes a really nice second draft bet the Raptors have made. I'm not super confident that's going to happen. And I'm admittedly have never really been much of a Davion Mitchell guy. Not my cup of tea necessarily, but I'm open to the idea of him carving out a bench role on this team. Sasha Vezenkov, I think, maybe the higher upside of the two. He is 28 years old. Of course, former EuroLeague MVP, came over to the Kings last year, requested a trade at the end of this year. And it just didn't really work out with the Kings. And you hope that there's this sort of thing sometimes with European guys where the first year in the league is a big adjustment and they kind of settle in going into their second season. Maybe that happens with Vezenkov. I do think Vezenkov is kind of an archetype of player that was maybe more at home in the NBA 10 years ago, where he doesn't really defend. And the idea of him is just like high volume and accurate 3-point shooting. He shot 38% on 3 attempts a game in just 12 minutes a game for the Kings this past season in his first year, just 42 games played. So the 3-point shooting is very real, and maybe there's something to tap into there. Just as like a spacing option in the Raptors lineups. Of course, we know the Raptors need shooting, and they've obviously started to address that with, the Grady Dick pick last year, Jacoby Walter in this draft. None of their second round picks have any shooting to really lean on or rely upon, but that's fine. Vezenkov does have a 3-point stroke that you could maybe get something out of. But, it's tough, right? Guys who are one-dimensional and only shoot threes and don't really defend, that's just not a type of player that really has success in the NBA anymore. You got to have a little bit more to your game. There's got to be more dimension. Kelly Olynyk, not a very good defender, but on top of being a great 3-point shooter, he's got playmaking juice. He can run your offense in some instances. There's a little bit more in terms of depth to his game. We'll have to see if Vezenkov can tap into more of that. Seems like he wasn't super happy with the Kings. He did request a trade, or he was going to go back to Europe, I think was the reporting on it a few weeks ago. And so maybe a fresh, set of eyes, a European-inspired coach in Darko Rajakovic, who plays with European principles. Maybe that gets a little bit more out of Sasha Vezenkov. But really, this is about getting those extra couple of picks. And I think just kind of, again, taking a couple of probably low likelihood shots on a couple of guys who will be off your books after this season anyway. The real sort of takeaway here is that it makes quite a roster crunch for the Raptors to sort out over the next few days. And it makes the roster kind of wildly imbalanced. There is a whole lot of two guards on this team right now. If you look at the roster right now as it stands, I'm assuming Emmanuel Quickley is just going to be back with the Raptors. So I've built him into the roster I've built here. But the roster as it stands for the Raptors, Emmanuel Quickley, Bruce Brown, obviously, he's got the big guaranteed date on the 29th looming over him, but right now he is on the team. Davion Mitchell, and then you have Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter, RJ Barrett, Ochai Agbaji. I have filling out the 3 right now, which is not ideal. I think both of those guys are 2 guards in the perfect world. Ochai Agbaji, I'm very curious to see what he looks like to start next season. I think his time with the Raptors, maybe his NBA career, is going to be in the balance for the first couple of months next year, as there's going to be a lot of competition for those guard minutes. And Ochai Agbaji has got to be a lot better than he was with the Raptors this past season to hang on to those minutes, I think. Then in the front court, you got Scottie Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher still on the roster, of course, Sasha Vezenkov, Jakob Poeltl, and Jonathan Mogbo. You have a two-way with DJ Carton. I should have added Jamal Shead is a guaranteed deal per Kelly Iko as well. So you have him in the mix. That's 14 guaranteed roster spots right now as it stands. You've got a non-guaranteed Javon Freeman Liberty. And then you have the UFA cap holds of Gary Trent Jr. We'll see. Jordan Nwora, bye-bye. And Garrett Temple, good so long, friend. Hope you become an assistant coach next season. Lot to sort out with the roster, with the balancing of things. And there are a few different ways this can go for the Raptors in the next couple of days. I don't think this is the roster we're going to see the Raptors go into the season with. It just doesn't make sense to have this many two guards competing for not that many two guard minutes, right? It just, it does seem like they're leaning into RJ Barrett being more of a 3 and Scottie Barnes maybe filling into 3 a little bit more. If that's the case, like one of the big stories going into the season is going to be, can RJ Barrett and Scottie Barnes ratchet it up as perimeter defenders? If they can, the Raptors' issues on the wing get a little bit easier to figure out, and the roster slots into place a little bit more easily. The positional versatility of Scottie Barnes becomes a real asset, but we have not seen a ton to suggest that ace on-ball wing defense is something those guys are capable of. Barrett's dabbled in it a little bit in his early time with the Knicks, but last year was really bad for Barrett on the defensive end. That just has to be better, full stop, not just for next year's team, but for, frankly, the long-term fit of RJ Barrett in this team. Like, that's a really big story anyway. But with the way the roster is set up, it's like incumbent upon Barrett and Scottie Barnes to go and figure out how to defend on the perimeter. It's just going to be a thing they need. There's a lot of not very good defensive players on this roster, and they're going to have some insulation. Right now, where that insulation comes from is a little bit unclear to me, but that's where things sit. Ochai Agbaji can certainly carve himself out a role if he's a nasty defender. I'm not worried about Davion Mitchell and Jamal Shead and their defense. It's going to be nasty. Those guys, very, very, very good on ball, point of attack defenders, but they're not starting for you. They're not playing super heavy minutes for you. There's got to be defense coming from somewhere else. And I would imagine that there is still a move or two here for the Raptors. Getting back to the options they have, it seems like the two options right now is one, you retain Bruce Brown, you keep Gary Trent Jr., and you just kind of go into the season with this team and you figure it out. That maybe is not super ideal because of the deal with the Kings and the extra money that came in, about $9 million extra dollars on the books, exchanging McDaniels for Vezenkov and Mitchell. The full mid-level exception will not be available to the Raptors if they bring back Bruce Brown and pay Gary Trent Jr. what it's going to take to pay Gary Trent Jr. They're just not going to have the money to get that full mid-level exception, which is maybe their best tool to go and try and add a wing, your Caleb Martin type, your Najee Marshall type, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about the list of options in the free agency market a ton. The other way you could go is you decline Bruce Brown's option. You say, hey, we thought we might find a trade for him, but we're not. We'll use cap space instead. You renounce Gary Trent Jr.'s cap hold. You let him walk to free agency, and you get to about $20-ish million in salary cap space. Maybe that's enough to throw an offer sheet to Patrick Williams that the Bulls don't want to match. You could go 4 years, 80, something like that. Maybe that's an option there. I'm a little terrified of paying Patrick Williams all that money, but also the cap is going up and it's probably fine to pay him $20 million a year. It might not even be enough to get the Bulls to pass, but the Bulls are weird. Just drafted Matas Buzelis, and there's positional overlap there and all of that. Maybe they just want to wipe the slate clean with Patrick Williams and move on. It's worth a conversation. You wouldn't throw out the offer sheet if you didn't have a good sense of what the intentions of the Bulls are. One would think it's not going to be a surprise necessarily. We'll see there. That's one option. The other option is with that cap space, instead of Patrick Williams, you go and maybe split it between a couple of guys. Maybe you throw Najee Marshall just like a smidge over the mid-level exception, so you outbid all the other teams offering the mid-level for him and get him in the door to be your starting wing next season. Is that perfect? I don't know if he's a starter necessarily, but worth a shot. He's a good defender, and the Raptors need good defenders. The other guy there is Caleb Martin, I think. And then you use your $5-6 million of extra leftover money for a Jalen Smith, a Goga Batadze, another big man to kind of add to the mix. I think that is a fine option. It would sort of rebalance the roster a little more effectively, I think, and probably prefer to just keeping Bruce and Gary and using like a small chunk of a mid-level exception, like the not the full version you can get or that they could have gotten to in a previous version of the team where Jalen McDaniels is on the team and not the Vezenkov Mitchell duo. Maybe they offload a Chris Boucher and this changes the calculus. Maybe Sasha Vezenkov, goes back to Europe and, maybe that's a thing, right? Like there's all sorts of different ways this can go, but right now this roster is whack and something's got to give somewhere. The roster spots are largely spoken for. The Bruce Brown thing, obviously the next domino to fall. We're going to talk more about that on tomorrow's show as Jamar Hines is going to join to kind of look ahead to the free agency window, Bruce Brown, all that good stuff. But we'll put a bow on that for now. That's where the roster sits after that deal. Again, a good deal overall, like clear positive value for the Raptors. Creates some headaches and sort of roster crunch things that got to be sorted out. But I'm sure they don't make that trade without an idea of what their plan is going forward here. It all seems confusing and misplaced and misshapen until it's not, when the transaction cycle begins and things fall into focus. So not too worried there. You get that extra pick next year from the Blazers. That's not a bad thing to have either. Good trade all around. Trade of the century? Maybe not. It's not Grievous Vasquez for OG Anunoby and Norman Powell, but it's pretty good nonetheless. We'll come back on the other side and we'll round up the show with my chat with Cam Stewart of Locked On Baylor. Yes, it's a longer episode today, but there's a lot to talk about, man. So you just got to deal with it, okay? Really good conversation coming up with Cam. Looking forward to that, and we will get to that in just 1 second. Joining me now on Locked On Raptors is our pal from the Locked On Network from Locked On Baylor. It is the host of that show, Cam Stewart, here to talk about a man he watched a whole lot of during his freshman season at Baylor, Toronto Raptors 19th overall pick, Jacoby Walter. Cam, thanks so much for taking the time, man. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm doing well. This has become the last couple of years a fun time of year for Baylor fans. It wasn't always that way with the NBA draft, but now we're getting guys in the first round every year. And I mean, I think there's a ton of upside at 19 for a guy like Jacoby Walter. This is a guy a lot of us thought were going to be in the top 10 most of the year. So that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? But I think it's going to be a positive thing for the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Webster, Raptors GM, spoke to the media after the draft and basically said, yeah, we didn't think he would be there at 19. And so it was sort of like he's the best guy on our board, we better go do it type of thing. I want to get into a few elements of Walter's game. We'll start with the stuff that feels more safe and certain at the NBA level. Then we'll kind of go a little bit more abstract into the stuff that might be there down the line for him. But let's start with the shooting. Obviously, the raw numbers for him from the field last season from three-point range, not super sexy. 34% on north of 6 attempts per game, shot well below 40% overall. Just like not a very good, efficient shooting season from Jacoby Walter as a freshman. But all of the scouting intel you read and you watch him on film, it does feel like the three-point shooting should translate pretty well to the NBA. I think just like the instances of watching him fly around a screen and catch and rise and fire with that sort of the form that he has, which he kind of has that sort of JJ Redick thing where he sort of jumps forward when he's catching it on coming around a screen or whatever. That I think is NBA level shooting. I think that's going to work. But you watched him this year. What did you see in the shooting? Is there any reason for optimism, any reason for skepticism for you when it comes to the 3-point shooting? And I guess by extension, the sort of 2-point stuff as well, which was pretty bad for him this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, Sean, you nailed a lot of it there. I mean, truly, you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, really? This guy is getting the hype. And for a guy who watched him game in, game out, it could have been. I mean, look, numbers don't lie, right? Sometimes he was in a slump. He hit a bit of a slump in the middle of his conference schedule this year, with the Big 12 being the best conference in college basketball. And part of that I chalked up to he's 19 years old. Barely. And so he was just going through that freshman slump of it all and playing, being, used a lot more than he would have at the high school level in terms of the schedule and everything. But you watch the tape of him shooting, and there's a lot there to like. From right away, his first game, he dropped, I think it was 28 points, and it was catch and shoot. You could see it. I mean, it was just 18-year-olds did not come that polished in terms of, like you said, coming off a screen, catching it, no matter where his body is at, being able to square up to the basket in the air and have a pure shooting form. One of my favorite plays from him this year was a game-tying three-pointer at the end of the first overtime in a big rivalry game against TCU, where he was basically sprinting down the court in a last-second situation and got the ball on the wing and was able to basically stop on a dime, face the basket from an elbow three, and nail it at the buzzer. And it was pure. For a guy to be going at that speed and to be able to square up to the basket so naturally, that was kind of the things that jumped off for us. And he didn't have much of a 2-point game. There is something that I do like about him getting to the free throw line, which is something that's not easy again for a lot of college freshmen. He attempted the second most free throws in the conference and made the third most, just a shade under 80% from the free throw line. So that obviously does need to get a little bit better, as do the overall shooting numbers. But I think with the specialization coaching you're going to get in the NBA from any team, he's going to just improve the little things on that jump shot. And I don't know if you've heard this term, Sean, but like 80 to 85% of the league now is 3-and-D. So I think that's what you could be looking at with Jacoby as a 3-and-D guy at that size and that pure shooting form already. I think that gets better. And who knows, the first year or two, it could still be a struggle, but he's a kid that does not lack confidence. Very coachable from what we've heard from everyone inside that locker room, which they don't say about everybody. And contrary to what some people might believe. And that shot, I think, is going to play really, really well in today's NBA.
Yeah, and I think the idea of putting a bunch of movement shooting around Scottie Barnes sounds pretty good to me. We know Emmanuel Quickley can do it already. We know Grady Dick figures to be that type of player as he levels up, hopefully in year 2 and beyond. And I think Walter, the shooting piece of it fits the Raptors sort of the MO they have to be going by right now, which is
and I think he does have a lot of I was just going to say, I just think he has a lot of similarities with Grady Dick. So I'm glad you brought that up. I saw Grady play a lot in college as well in the Big 12 and saw him live a couple of times. I think there are more similarities there than a lot of people realize. So I just wanted to say I like that you brought that name into it. Yeah.
No, yeah. I just think that, like movement shooting, it's not just stationary, stand in the corner and knock down wide open threes, right? And I think that's the concern sometimes with prospects. Where it's like, oh, look at the great shooting, but it's like, what kind of threes is he taking? Walter's threes are just like a lot more difficult than your standard stand in the corner, wait for the offense or to sort of funnel to you in the corner or whatever type of threes. And so that's why I feel pretty good about it translating. And like the idea of like Emmanuel Quickley, Grady Dick, and Jacoby Walter flying around off screens with Scottie Barnes picking them out sounds pretty interesting to me. You mentioned the 3-and-D thing. Let's get to the defense, which I think is maybe something that didn't quite translate as much based on what you read and watch at college in his freshman year. As you mentioned, he was 19 years old in the best conference in college basketball. So that has to be baked into it. But he is 6'10", and he does figure to have defensive upside to lean into. He's got the tools to be a good defender. What would you sort of put in as your baseline expectation for him in the NBA defensively? And what did you see this year, good or bad, that kind of informs what your overall view of his defense is?
Yeah, well, I just got to say that 6'10" wingspan is just mouthwatering, like
Hmm.
truly. And I can't sit here and be like he was an elite defender in the college level. He wasn't. He played well within a team system defense that Baylor had, but I think that might have limited them a little bit on what they could do defensively. And he wasn't the only one. But I see that length and I see his strength already, and I just think that that has to turn into an above average defender in the NBA. I'll throw out the name of Jason Tatum. He's not going to be Jason Tatum. Hold on with me. But to way that he developed into a defender and at
Right.
times an elite defender in the league, mainly because of his size and specifically his length. I
Mhm.
can see that happening with Jacoby Walter at a bit smaller. In fact, I'll even throw out another crazy name for you. I remember the early days of Pascal Siakam before he really became that polished and offensive player. He was a pretty good defender, and I know
Yeah.
that's dipped down a little bit to still an above average defender, but his length helped him out so much in switchability. And I
Mhm.
think Jacoby Walter, while not being 6'8", 6'9", with that wingspan, can switch on to some small forwards as well as guarding in the backcourt. And so that's its potential there. Again, it's
Yeah.
not something that's going to scream out to you on tape the way his shooting form might, but I think there is a lot of potential there on the defensive end for sure. And he was getting some good assignments in the Big 12. He had a lot of good assignments going against him. In fact, when he played Houston, Jamal Shead was covering him, who was the defensive player of the year in college
Right.
basketball. So he got some tough assignments on both ends. But I actually do see a ton of potential from that defensive side for him because of that wingspan, because of his physicality. And again, not to be beating this drum here, but how much he was able to adjust during a season and how much the coaches raved about how he takes coaching. Again, it's just not everyone who's one and done is getting those kind of compliments.
Seems to Cam like he kind of has the reputation as like a dude with a high give a crap meter, which I feel like
Yeah.
matters a lot on defense. Can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely. Very high on the give a crap meter. I'll say that.
Excellent. We love that.
The intensity off the charts with him, and a really well-spoken guy, but make no mistake about it, when we were in press conferences with him, he wasn't happy and smiley, before or after a game.
Mhm.
He was an absolute gamer. And I mean, to what you just said there, that's the biggest thing about playing defense in the NBA, especially in your early days, right? Like if you can handle that assignment and take on that challenge, chances are you're going to become a good defender. And I think he is right there. You look at the numbers, and obviously he was a better shooter than just about anything else in his game, but he did a lot of little things to help Baylor win last year. When he was in that slump, he became like the team's second leading rebounder for 3 games as a
Right.
guard, and
Right.
he had a couple of assist games where he had 4 or 5 assists, which doesn't seem like much, but for a guy who's a spot up shooter, that's a lot. And so he was doing a lot of little things, and on the defensive end too. So that just shows me that this guy is going to do what you tell him to do and
Mhm.
what is going to help him fit best into the team.
Love to hear that. Obviously, I think the defense to me feels like a worthwhile bet. The shooting feels like a worthwhile bet. And if those two things can combine, that's a player that basically every good team is happy to have. I
Yeah.
think the sort of next level of, okay, is there something beyond that? Can he be more than, I know you mentioned in the video that we ran earlier on the channel last night, Contavious Caldwell Pope comes to mind. I
Mhm.
mentioned
Yep.
Danny Green as sort of an
Too.
example as well, just like two guards who can defend and bomb threes. They have a place in the league, but for that extra little bit of juice, for the sort of upside play of this, I'm curious, what do you make of his sort of creation upside, if there is any? It didn't seem
Mhm.
to flash a ton at Baylor this year, but he spoke about, feeling like he has that last night when he spoke to the media. Obviously, any player is going to feel pretty good
Right.
about their own abilities to do things. So you got to take that with a grain of salt too. But do you think there is, some creation ability in there? Is it maybe something that it caps out as a guy who can make something happen attacking a closeout and sort of keep the sequence going? What do you see as the upside for him creation wise? And what did you see this year that kind of, might tip your hand one way or another?
Yeah, it's definitely the least amount of confidence of the tools that we've talked about so far in terms of his shot creating ability. And I know that's kind of what separates the men from the boys in the NBA, from the max guys from everyone else. And there were flashes of, especially when he was facing really tough defenders, that Shead game comes to mind, where he could dribble a little bit to the left side and shoot some tough twos and make some tough twos. He was making NBA long twos by the end of his time at Baylor, but it was something that he struggled with. And in Baylor's offense specifically, they had a true facilitating pass first and pass second point guard. And so that helped the team offense entirely, but that's probably why you didn't see him creating a lot. And I know he talked about that last night, where he feels he has that in his bag. But we just didn't see a lot of it. So it's not something I could sit here and be like, yeah, just give him some time. He'll nail that. But he is a guy who I think his athleticism is going to take him a long way. We have seen guys in the NBA the last few years who came out either as spot up 3-point shooters or just really raw athletic guys who have figured out those things in between. And so I see, a great shooting ability from Jacoby, which is, something that is tougher to teach. And I see enough athleticism there that I think he can do that in the future. But I would say that is the biggest question mark in his game, both creating for himself and, of course, creating for others as well. You don't expect him to play point guard, but I think that's where he is going to struggle in the early days anyway.
Yeah, I mean, on a team with Emmanuel Quickly and Scottie Barnes, and also a team that runs a ton of stuff through their bigs, like, I don't think they're going to ask very much from him on the ball anyway. But yeah, I think if down the line he can become the type of dude who, attacking a closeout, if he's a great shooter, that's going to make those closeouts all that much easier to attack, of course, to gain that advantage. I think there is at least a reasonable hope that he can become, a second side creation type guy at the sort of very peak of his outcomes. I don't think he's ever running 100 pick and rolls for you in a game, but I think that's perfectly fine with what the Raptors are going with. And look, it's the 19th overall pick. There's only so much you can hope to get there. And it does feel like the floor here is pretty high when it comes to Jacoby Walter, if the tools click in and sort of mesh with the NBA game. Cam, this was great. Thank you so much for offering the insight. I really appreciate it. Going to look forward to hopefully catching up with you again as Jacoby Walter, makes his way into the NBA. We can certainly bring you back in. Anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Well, yeah, we've got some draft reaction coming up on Locked On Baylor. You can see on my Twitter there at Real Cam Stewart. I'm retweeting it all the time, and at Locked On Baylor. And look, I mean, Baylor's getting top 5 guys, top 5 prospects every year now. So Raps fans, once you get towards that springtime, also you might want to check in on some prospects. We'll have you covered, because it seems like Baylor is going to have top 20 guys every year. So yeah, be sure to check us out. And I know for my Canadians who are looking to get into college basketball, start and end with the Big 12, man. It's all pure chaos, and we'll have you covered there too.
This was great. Thank you so much. And we will catch up very, very soon. And thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. Bye.